the rules or stuff like this and the how-tos and what to expect when you get dealing with visitors. I just want to tell you guys, we are actually very, very lucky with the crew that came with us this time to Auburn. Very lucky. We got to come, or I got to come, I should say, with some of our volunteers who work at the wall in DC. And honestly, I want to make sure that they have the opportunity to speak and tell you what they do while they're there and to give a bit of a tour. So right now, I want to introduce everybody to Alan McCabe.
So on behalf, I'm also on the board of directors at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, and we're the organization that built the wall in DC back in 1982. And we sincerely appreciate you all being here tonight. One thing I wanted to mention, in DC, we get about 5 million visitors a year. And sometimes on a Saturday afternoon in the summer, it seems like all 5 million are there at the same time. But there are 330 million people in the United States. And that means this year, 325 million of them won't come to DC to see the wall. So our theory here at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund is if you can't come to DC, we'll bring the wall to you. And we've been doing that for 30 years now, all over the country. In fact, a number of years ago, we went to Ireland and toured in Ireland with the wall. And early next year, we're looking at taking the wall to Hawaii. I'm sure we'll have a lot of volunteers for that too. But it's interesting in DC, I've volunteered there for 23 years now. The visitors at the wall in DC are different than the visitors we'll get here. Because in DC, so many of them are they're tourists. And they're there to see the White House and the Capitol and the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, and Vietnam is on the list. But we have found at the local events, the people that come here for a reason. They come here to see the wall, not to see the Lincoln Memorial. So the emotions here are different and oftentimes much more powerful than we see in Washington, D.C. So having volunteers here to help those folks is critical. And we're so thankful that you're here to be able to help them. And a couple of things about being a volunteer, you know, it's a little bit, it's tricky ground, right? Because for a lot of people, it's so emotional and so powerful to come and see their loved one on this wall. But please don't let anybody leave here without having one of you come up to them and say, thank you for coming. Can I answer any questions for you, or can I help you find a name? And a lot of times you'll approach a visitor and you'll come up to them and you say, can I help you? And the immediate answer is no. But give them 5 minutes. Just stand back. You don't have to be in their face. And a lot of times they'll turn to you in a few minutes and say, yeah, I can use some help. I either need a shoulder to cry on, or I need help finding a name, or I can't understand how the names on this memorial are arranged. There are so many things that as a volunteer, and a great job was done up there to explain that trailer. That is so powerful up there. Make sure everybody has an opportunity to go up there and see that as well. So, you know, we're open 24 hours a day through Sunday, so we need volunteers, you know, all night and all day long. And we've had visitors come out at 3 o'clock in the morning, and a lot of times it's a Vietnam vet that just couldn't possibly bring himself to come to the wall in the daylight, and they come at night. And so a lot of times some of the most powerful experiences are at night here at the wall. And another thing we found is a lot of times a vet can't go to the wall in DC, they can't bring themselves to do it because they're by themselves. But here, they can come with their family. They've got a social network here to support them. And so that brings out a lot of vets that maybe have never even been to the wall in Washington, D.C. And so this is a very special moment for them. And your role as a volunteer is so critical to be able to help them. So Kathy asked me if I could spend just a couple of minutes talking about the memorial and its design. So the memorial opened in 1982 So the wall turned 40 years old last fall. The idea for a Vietnam Veterans Memorial came from this man named Jan Scruggs. Scruggs was a Vietnam veteran. He came home and he was attending a meeting in the spring of 1979 of angry Vietnam veterans. And they were mad. They couldn't get health care. They couldn't buy a home. They couldn't get a job. And he's at this meeting, and at the end of it, he stands up and says, "I think we need a memorial." Well, they laughed at him. They're like, "We don't need a memorial, for God's sakes. We need some help, some assistance." And Scruggs said, if we build a memorial, no one can ever forget our Vietnam veterans. And they can never sweep Vietnam under the rug. And they will have to deal with the issues of health care and housing and jobs and Agent Orange and all of the other things that went along with being a Vietnam veteran. And so he founds the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. They began to raise money. They got Congress to approve it, which was really an amazing thing. There was no World War II memorial. There was no Korean memorial. There was no World War I memorial. The Vietnam Memorial was the first national war memorial built in Washington, D.C., before all the others. It was after this got built that the other ones got built, because they saw that our Vietnam vets had really pushed the issue of being recognized and not being treated like they had been treated when they came home. So Congress approves it. The design was a contest open to all U.S. citizens 18 years of age or older. There were only 4 rules in the contest: make no political statements, maintain the park-like setting of the National Mall, be a place of contemplation, and contain the names of every one of our dead and missing, so that they would never be forgotten. Those were the only 4 rules. They opened the contest in the fall of 1980 and ran it to the spring of 1981. They got 1,421 entries in the national contest. So many entries, they had to rent a hangar at Andrews Air Force Base to lay all of the entries out in. They had a panel of 8 judges that went through all 1,421 entries, and at the end of the week, all 8 judges had unanimously picked one design out of 1,421. And it's the design that you see behind me, the memorial that came to be known as the Wall. Well, the critics hated it. It was black. It was underground. Some Vietnam vets called it a black gash of shame. One Vietnam said, well, this is typical. They wanted to bury us when we came home from Vietnam. Now they want to bury the memorial below ground level. One Vietnam vet called it a giant public urinal, so that Americans could come and once again urinate on their Vietnam veterans. And the criticism didn't stop with just with the design. The critics attacked the person that designed it, because the designer, the winner of the contest, was a 21-year-old college student named Maya Lin. Maya was a junior at Yale, majoring in architecture, when she decided to enter the national contest. And when she won it, the critics screamed, a 21-year-old woman, not a veteran, and of Chinese descent. And remember, China had backed North Vietnam during the war. The critics called her a gook. And she said that herself in her books. She said, they called me a gook. She was born in Ohio, but her parents had come from China. And the fact that an Asian woman who had never served in the military and so young had designed this created all this controversy. But that young woman stood strong, and in the end, she convinced the critics that this should be the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. So quickly, how it's designed. One of the requirements is that all the names had to be included on this, 58,281. They are listed in the order they died or the order in which they went missing in action. So it's not alphabetical, it's not by state, it's not by branch of service, it's not by rank. They're Americans, and rank and race and religion do not matter when you've given your life for this country. And so everybody is equal on the wall. Maya Lin said she wanted the memorial to tell the story of a journey. So the names are listed day by day in the order they died or went missing. And when you talk to a visitor, that is so powerful for a couple of reasons. Maya Lin said that by listing it chronologically, every name is a moment in American history. But I think it's more important than that. It puts those that fought together and died together forever together on the wall. And it also allows a veteran to come back and find his or her tour of duty. So if I know when somebody was in Vietnam, I can get them back exactly in front of the panels to be with the guys they served with. You'll collect your own stories over the next several days, but one of the most powerful stories I've ever had at the wall occurred to me last summer. And a guy came up to me, probably in his 50s, and he said, "Can you help me find February 2nd, 1968? And I said, "Yeah, I know exactly where that's at." So we went over, it's down on this wall, out toward the end. And as we're walking out there, I said, "What happened on February 2nd, 1968? And he said, "My dad was on patrol and their squad got hit. And my dad was wounded and fell on the battlefield. And the fighting is raging on between the Viet Cong and my dad's squad. And he's lying there on the battlefield wounded, and somebody rushed out to grab him and grabbed him by his utilities and starts to pull him back. And the guy that was pulling him back was hit and killed. And he fell on the battlefield. Finally, the fighting stops. He said, "My dad was picked up by a dust-off helicopter and taken to the hospital. And my dad, to this day, does not know who it was that died trying to save him. But I know it was February 2nd, 1968. There were 45 guys killed that day in Vietnam. So we found it on the wall, and when I left him, he had his cell phone out, and he was taking a picture of all 45 guys that had been killed that day. So he could take the photos back to his dad and say, "I don't know which one it was, Dad, but I know one of these guys died trying to save your life." So only by having the names in chronological order could that ever happen. So that's why it is so powerful when visitors ask you, why isn't it alphabetical? Why isn't it by state? Why aren't the guys from Auburn all listed together on the wall? It's because it's in the order that they died, and the guys that fought together and died together are together on the wall. Now, Maya Lin did a couple of interesting things. It's logical to assume it starts small, that this must be the peak of the war, and that it ends down there. If people come in from that side, it's easy to think that's the start, and it rounds around this way. But Maya Lin did not do it that way. The names start in the center. The highest panels, 1959, are the first deaths. 2 U.S. Army advisors, Major Dale Bice and Master Sergeant Chester Ovnand, were killed on 8 July 1959. And so that starts the deaths. It then begins to read panel by panel in the order they died. Now, you wouldn't think a tall panel, we didn't lose a lot of guys early on. So when you're showing visitors, this first panel takes 6 years. It goes from 59 to June 6, 1965. 6 years. This panel takes 5 months.
Wow.
This panel is 5 weeks. With about 700 names on a panel. So you can see when Lyndon Johnson starts pouring ground troops into Vietnam in the spring of 1965, this panel really starts the escalation. So this side goes out all the way, 29,000 names, to the 25th of May, 1968. So there's 29,000 names down this side. It then picks up the same day, 25 May, 68, comes back another 29,000 names. And by the way, this last panel takes 3 years because my favorite president, Lyndon Johnson, who meant I wasn't going to Vietnam in 1972, had pulled the last ground troops out. And so I was in the 72 draft, but they didn't take anybody that year because Nixon had finally was pulling the ground troops out. So this last panel is mostly pilots, again, supporting South Vietnamese troops. This takes 3 years. And it finally ends on the 15th of May, 1975, when we lost 18 guys in the rescue of a ship called the Mayaguez off the coast of Cambodia. That was May 15th, 1975. So this design brings the first and the last together. It's a closure. So it's full circle from 59 to 68, 68 to 1975. Look what Maya Lin did. On this side, the panels are left column justified, like the right-hand side pages of a book. This is left column justified, right side ragged. Over here, it's right column justified, left side ragged, like the left-hand side pages of a book. And what that does is it pulls this panel and this panel together as if this is the binding of the book. So the story that this wall writes is the history of the Vietnam War, written in the names of 58,281 men and women. There are 2 symbols on the wall. Almost all names have a diamond. A diamond means that they've been declared dead. A plus symbol by the name means that they're still status unknown. So we don't know what happened to them, often called missing in action. There's about 730 men still with a plus symbol on the wall. So that's one of the questions visitors will often ask you, what's with the diamonds and the pluses? On this side, it follows the name, and on this side, it precedes the name. So over here it's in front, over here it's in back. And what we do on the wall in DC, and we also do here, is if somebody's remains are recovered and identified, the engravers come back and they change the plus into a diamond. More than 500 missing in action have been recovered over the years, and those pluses are changed into diamonds. If you help somebody look up a name, we have rubbing blanks, and that's one of the great things about this wall, is if you've been in DC, you know you can do tracings off of the wall. You can actually do them off of this one. The one we had before was metal and you couldn't do tracings, but with this one you can. So on the brochure that you'll give people is a blank space that you can do rubbings. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So this is what it looks like. So this is the brochure with information on the memorial, and right on it is a space that you can do a rubbing for.
Cool.
And it's just as simple as holding this up and centering it, and then using a pencil and rubbing diagonally across it, and the name will come through. But don't let anybody leave that has looked up a name without asking them if they would like to have a name rubbing to take home. It's a very powerful thing for somebody to be able to take this home with them. It's a memory that I've talked to so many people. They take them home and they frame them, and they've got them up on the wall. It's a way of remembering a buddy or a loved one, somebody they served with. So make sure everybody gets asked if they would like a rubbing when you look up a name for them. There are other components of the memorial that we aren't simply able to bring here. One is a statue in DC called the Three Servicemen, which is a beautiful statue done by a sculptor named Frederick Hart, honoring all of those who came home from Vietnam and aren't on the wall. Obviously we couldn't bring that with us. And then there's also a statue of the women who served, often called the Nurses Memorial, but it's the Women's Memorial, honoring nearly 10,000 women that served in Vietnam and the 8 women who were on the wall. Just as a quick reference point, so if you're looking for any of the women, here's panel 5, and Carol Drasba and Elizabeth Jones. Those are the first 2. They were 22-year-old second lieutenants that died in a helicopter crash in February of 1966. So those are the first 2, and the last one is right here, and her name is Mary Clinker. She was an Air Force captain She died in the evacuation of orphans out of Saigon in April of 1975. It was called Operation Baby Lift. And so that's, if you've got young kids or a young girl in the group, and you ask them, how many women do you think are on the wall? And then you can actually show them. And all 8 of them were nurses, 7 Army, and 1 Air Force. So unfortunately, we can't bring the Women's Memorial here with us as well. And one other section of the memorial that we have in DC that we did bring a copy of is behind you. You'll see it a little bit later. It's called the In Memory Plaque. We have a ceremony in DC on Father's Day weekend where we honor all of those men and women who have died as a result of their service in Vietnam, who are not eligible to be on the wall. Agent Orange deaths, post-traumatic stress, alcoholism, drug addiction, suicides. It was all caused by their service in Vietnam. And so we honor them, but we can't honor them if we don't know about them. So we have also brochures you can hand out called the In Memory Program. If you know of anybody, a family that's lost a loved one because of their service in Vietnam, there's no charge to be honored in that. All you have to do, as Kathy said, is fill out the form. We need a DD-214. We need some photos of them. And the family is invited to come to Washington, D.C. on Father's Day weekend. And we have a stage set up. They come up and read their loved one's name aloud. And then their name is kept forever on our website so that their image and name are never forgotten. So you can talk about the In Memory ceremony. You can talk about the other ceremonies we have, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, Agent Orange Awareness Day, Vietnam Veterans Day, lots of ceremonies at the wall that are hosted by the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. As I wrap up, one thing I do want to say, every year, more than 100 towns and cities across the country express interest in having the wall come there. But only about 30 make the cut. And we're here because you guys made the cut. It requires a lot of work. Yes, absolutely. It's a lot of work to get it here, but more, we need the volunteer coordination, having a generator here for the lighting and the porta potties and the food and the local advertising and all of that. It really is a commitment by the local organizations to make this thing a success. And you're a critical part of that success. So thank you all so much for being here. And I'll be here throughout the week. And of course, Kathy's here, and Kent is over here, and John Barry is a Vietnam vet. He's a fellow volunteer at the wall, and he'll be here. Don't be shy about asking us any questions. If a visitor stumps you on something, we're here. But again, don't be afraid to talk to them. They need you to talk to them. And so we're here if there's anything. Kathy always gives me 20 minutes, and I can't ever stop at 20. Thank you all so much.